Howdy! I'm sorry it took so long. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be ranking the 17 studio albums by Fleetwood Mac, covering all their various lineups, and we're going to be going from worst to best. Now, I think that there are a lot of opinions on this list that not a lot of people are going to agree with, but we'll get there when we get there. Cool. And remember, this is my list, not your list, not the list, my opinions. So, don't be mad at me if I put an album you love in last. In 17th and last place, I put Mr. Wonderful from 1968. This is an album that really just does not have any original ideas. They use the same exact blues riff in 4 separate songs, and it really just gets extremely boring and repetitive. I'm also, as you'll see later in this list, I'm not the biggest fan of late 60s, early 70s Fleetwood Mac. Like, that blues rock style just gets way too repetitive and boring for me. But yeah, this album pretty easily sits at the bottom of the pile for me, unfortunately. At number 16, I have Say You Will, the most recent album by the band. Really, this is a solo collaboration project between Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. So it's technically a Fleetwood Mac album, I guess, but at the same time, not really. It's too long, and I've seen some people say that's like, you know, a modern, mature Fleetwood Mac, but honestly, I just think it's a pretty unlistenable mess. I warned you guys that I don't like late 60s, early 70s blues rock Fleetwood Mac, because the next album on our list is Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, the first Fleetwood Mac album. This album is not bad. I just want to get that out of the way. This is not by any means a bad album. It's extremely forgettable, though, to the point where there's really nothing to say about it other than it's the first Fleetwood Mac album, you know? So, like, it's important from a historical standpoint, like that, but it's not an album that I personally have any interest in ever re-listening to, which is a shame, but what are you gonna do, right? At number 14, I have Then Play On from 1969, I'm pretty sure. This album takes a pretty hard right turn from the blues rock style of the first couple Fleetwood Mac albums, and this album is a lot more of like a soft rock. There's some prog elements, actually, which is really strange to think about. But this album is also just very forgettable. It's pretty long, and it really just does not sound like anything the band would make before or after, so because of that, it's going towards the bottom of the list. And I'm starting to realize as I'm recording this that there's a lot of Fleetwood Mac albums that I don't like that much, so that's fun.
Honestly, I could put number 13, Kilnhouse, in the same category because there's also nothing to talk about and I don't really like it that much. Okay, moving on.
Skipping over to number 12 then, I have what is apparently considered to be by far the worst Fleetwood Mac album, being 1995's Time. So, I understand why a lot of people say this is the worst Fleetwood Mac album, because they brought in a bunch of new members who never appear on any album after this, and a lot of songs don't sound that much like Fleetwood Mac. Any incarnation of Fleetwood Mac. Mostly because a lot of the people that are on this album as main members, singers, songwriters, don't show up ever again. But at the same time, I actually like the first 2 songs on this album quite a bit. The rest of it is just very forgettable for the most part, which is unfortunately what you can say about a lot of early Fleetwood Mac albums on this bottom half of the list. But I think this album, not that it gets unnecessary hate, but that the reasons that it seems to get as much hate as it does seem a little bit unfounded, if that makes any sense. Like, yes, this isn't a great album, but it is far from their worst because at least I can remember more than one of the songs. Barely edging ahead of Time, we have Behind the Mask from 1990. This was the first album since 1974 not to feature Lindsey Buckingham on any of the songs. Buckingham, usually his songs are really good, and he's not on this album, so logic would dictate that it wouldn't be as good. But on the other hand, Stevie Nicks and Christine McVie are still on this album, who I like more. Well, I like Christine, but Stevie Nicks I don't like as much. But they also can write really, really good songs. So what went wrong with this album? I don't really know. Maybe it is that the bouncing off of ideas from the 3 members that was really the strong point for the band, because Behind the Mask really does not sound like anything remotely resembling anything Fleetwood Mac at all. Like, the songs aren't really, even the good songs are not really catchy. They just kind of exist in their own little bubble, and there's really nothing to say about them. Okay guys, stay with me because we're in the top 10 and we're finally getting to albums that are actually okay. So at number 10, I have Bare Trees from 1972. Bare Trees is strange because I don't really know why it's strange. It just has a weird presence in the Fleetwood Mac canon. Like, it's a fine enough album. Sentimental Lady is actually a really good song. I actually really like that song. I also like Danny's Chant, not just because of me, but because it's actually pretty catchy, and there's just a vibe with this album. Like, the band, after this album, they made, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they made an album which kind of is completely in flux. But this album is pretty cohesive for what it is. So, yeah, 6 out of 10, moving on. And number 9, I have Future Games. Now, this also is probably a controversial one. From what I've read, this seems to be one of the more popular of the pre-Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks Fleetwood Mac. This seems to be one of the more popular of the early albums, which I kind of get why. Like, this album also plays kind of more into the folk rock, prog rock sound that Then Play On had. It's just a lot better, though. Like, all the individual songs are 10 times better than anything on that album. And even though it's not an essential album and none of the songs are really that memorable, it still is a worthwhile addition to their canon, and I'm happy that it exists. This is weird, but I'm putting Penguin 1973 at number 8. As I said, this album is completely insane. They had members who just came in, members who just left, members who wouldn't last longer than this one album. But honestly, I kinda like it. This is a really fun album, starting off with that really catchy song, Remember Me at the beginning, going on to that really awesome cover of Roadrunner. Like, there's really not, this is just a very strange, unusual album, and it's not great by any means, and it's actually pretty inconsistent at times, but that inconsistency is part of what makes it great, in my opinion. Like, this is just really enjoyable to listen to, and I actually highly recommend it. Okay, here comes probably the hottest of the hot takes. Number 7, I'm putting Tusk from 1979. Now, this is widely considered to be one of the best Fleetwood Mac albums, and I do not agree. I've seen a lot of people compare this to the Beatles' White Album, and I understand it's a big sprawling double album with the main songwriters all kind of writing their own things and only sort of including the other members off to the side every once in a while. But here's why the White Album is successful and not Tusk. The White Album, sure, there's moments where it goes completely nuts, right? Like Wild Honey Pie or Revolution 9, you know? Like, those songs should not exist on any album other than that album, but like, this, it has a much more cohesive feel to it, whereas this album just kind of trudges along in its melancholy mess. I do like Sarah, though. That's a good song. The Ledge is pretty catchy, but honestly, for the most part, it's pretty difficult to listen to, just because of how long and bloated it is. If they cut the weakest half of the songs and just put it out as a single album, it would definitely rank a couple spots higher. This was another surprise, but in 6th place, I'm going to put Heroes Are Hard to Find from 1974. This album really has Christine McVie come into her own as a songwriter, because she wrote the 2 best songs, the title track and Come a Little Bit Closer, and the rest of the album is pretty solid, but yeah, it's a pretty solid album. Chugging along into the top 5, we have 1973's Mystery to Me. This is an album with such better songs than on Penguin, which came out a few months earlier. Like, it's kind of staggering how different these 2 albums sound. This album was very heavily dominated by guitarist Bob Welch, and honestly, the first side of the album is pretty much perfect. I mean, it does lose steam in the second half, much like a lot of albums I've talked about before, but yeah, this, what can I say about it? Hypnotized, that's a really good song. Emerald Eyes is also a really good song. I like the song that's like, you guys see, forget what's that song called? I don't know. Christine has 2 really good songs on side 1, but for some reason I'm forgetting the name of them right now. But yeah, this is a really underrated album, I feel like, and I feel like it needs to be talked about more, because this album is really, 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 really good. Yeah. 1982's Mirage comes into the 4th place spot, and yeah, this is an album that's a 4th place spot. It's one of the best. No, but in all seriousness, this album has, what does it have? It has the really cool opening, Love in Store. It has Hold Me. It has probably the best Stevie Nicks song, Gypsy. And the rest of the album isn't really as hit. It's not as hit-filled as something like the 75 album or Rumors, which we'll talk about very shortly. But it does deserve to be talked about in the same sentence as those, I feel like, because like they have a very specific sound, Fleetwood Mac, and I feel like this album really does encapsulate that in the same way that those aforementioned albums do. And their next album, this unfortunately would be their last album for 5 years, which leads into our next album, number 3, Tango in the Night, which was the last album, and currently is the last album to feature the Core 5 lineup. Really, what is there to say about this album? This album has Little Lies, which is a really good song. It has Everywhere, which is probably one of my favorite Fleetwood Mac songs. It has Big Love, which is kind of uncomfortable to listen to, not gonna lie, but the parts when it's not uncomfortable is pretty great. The title track is great. Seven Wonders is awesome. It's a really awesome album. There's really not... Here's the problem with making an album ranking for Fleetwood Mac, is that everything has pretty much already been said. Coming in the second place spot is 1975's Fleetwood Mac, commonly referred to as the Fleetwood Mac White Album. And just looking at the track listing, like, pretty much every single song on this album could have been a hit, which is also, we'll talk about with their next album. You know which album it is. Yeah, pretty much like, Monday Morning is a really great album opener. You've got Warm Ways, which is a really underrated song. You've got Over My Head, Say You Love Me. You've got Rhiannon. You've got really, really iconic classic songs. Blue Letter, that's the other one I was thinking of as the highlight. Yeah, first half of this album is absolutely spectacular. Landslide! I forgot that Landslide was on this album too! Yeah, really good album. Listen to it. It's spectacular. Okay, you knew this was coming, but at the number 1 spot, I put Rumors from 1977. This is probably the most predictable album ranking ever? Like, how do you not put Rumors at number 1? What else do you want from this album? Like, every single song on here is basically perfect. You can't change a single thing about any of the songs on this album without kind of maybe ruining it a little bit, you know? Look at the track listing. Look at this. How many of these songs can you recognize? If you go look up the songs and listen to it, how many of these songs can you recognize now from like the first couple seconds? Other than the Beatles, no other band has put out an album this spectacularly perfect, like where every single song could have basically been a hit, is what I mean by that. Because obviously there are better albums than Rumors, but this album, literally, every single song on here could have been a humongous hit, I feel like. And, yeah, that's my Fleetwood Mac ranking. Sorry it took so long, but, yeah, hopefully you liked it. You can watch some other rankings and reviews over there. And, you can subscribe if you feel like it. I don't know, we just crossed 600, which is pretty cool. And, yeah, catch you all on the flippity flip.